The gravity of the time is such that every new avenue of peace, no matter how dimly discernible, should be explored. Never before in history has so much hope for so many people been gathered together in a single organization. You will provide a great share of the wisdom, of the courage, and the faith which can bring to this world lasting peace for all nations and happiness and well-being for all men.
Everyone, welcome to Titans of Nuclear. I'm here with Doug Sandridge. Welcome to Titans, Doug.
Thank you for having me. It's great. It's a great honor, a great pleasure.
Yeah, looking forward to kind of diving down into your unique experience and, experience around nuclears. But first off, would love to understand a little bit more about yourself. Maybe you can give a little bit more background on yourself, where you're from and how you got interested in nuclear.
Well, that's a long story because I'm an old person. I grew up most of my childhood overseas. My dad was a geological engineer for an oil and gas company, so we traveled across the world looking for oil and gas, and then moved back to the States when I was in high school. Finished high school in Midland, Texas, kind of the heart of the oil field, and I ended up going to University of Oklahoma, and went there originally to be an architect major, but didn't really like the course program. I love architecture, but didn't really like the classes. And really not knowing what I wanted to do, I was taking a lot of engineering classes. I decided to declare myself a nuclear engineering major. So I became a nuclear engineering major, not really because I thought I wanted to be a nuclear engineer. I just thought it sounded cool, and I really didn't know what I was going to do. But so I'm dating myself here because my sophomore year was 1979, and that's when the 3 Mile Island nuclear accident happened. And, the nuclear industry was already in a pretty steep decline at that point. And the movie, The China Syndrome, had just come out, and kind of the 3 Mile Island accident was really kind of the nail in the coffin, so to speak, for nuclear energy at the time. And so I, not being fully committed to nuclear engineering, I transferred into oil and gas development. And so I've spent my entire career in oil and gas development since the early 1980s.
Okay. So yeah, walk me through back when you were in college. What was kind of the young person's, view of nuclear back in the late 70s, early 80s?
I hear a lot of people say that we were all scared and we're hiding under our desks doing nuclear drills and stuff like that, but I don't really remember anything bad about nuclear at the time. I know that a lot of the environmental organizations like Sierra Club, who had originally supported nuclear energy, had begun to have second thoughts about it and were kind of turning against nuclear energy, but I was not aware of that. And so as a young person, I thought nuclear energy was our future. I mean, I didn't conflate nuclear power with nuclear bombs. So at the time, I don't know anyone. I'm sure there were people, but my generation, we generally had a favorable outlook on nuclear energy. But as the China Syndrome movie came out, and as we had that nuclear accident, which was, largely exaggerated, as we all know, nuclear energy started to kind of fade into the memory, and there wasn't much new construction. A lot of projects were finished that had been started, but there wasn't obviously a lot of new construction going on after I got into college.
Right. And then I guess so. You already came from an experience in the energy industry with your father, kind of working for one of the large oil and gas majors. What really drove you to specifically focus on oil and gas after that? Was it, the experience with your family, or did you have a particular interest there?
To be honest, a lot of people want their kids to follow in their footsteps, and I did not follow in the footsteps of my father because, he was in the industry. The reality was that oil and gas was booming at the time. I had a couple of summer jobs that were in the oil and gas business. I just fell in love with the business. I actually started out as a mechanic repairing pumping units where they were pumping oil out of the ground. And then I advanced to a roustabout on a workover rig, and then eventually worked on a drilling rig as a roughneck. And I just loved the industry. It was just um, very invigorating for a young person. I loved working on the drilling rig, to be quite frank. But my dad, after a couple of years, he saw I was doing this summer after summer, making great money. And
Hmm.
he said, "Son, this is not a lifestyle for a family person. If you want to get married and have a family, you do not want to be working on a drilling rig." And so I got into the legal and land aspects of the industry. But I just fell in love with the industry. But also, it paid so well. I mean, it was a really high paying job. And I'm not going to sugarcoat it and say that wasn't a part of it. I mean,
Hmm.
you can do something you really love and you can get paid a lot of money for it. It was a pretty easy decision.
Of course, yeah. I started off my career in the shale industry at the peak of that time in oil and gas as well. So, very familiar with it. Well, I guess walk me through. I know now that you maybe started off as a nuclear engineer in college, went on another path through oil and gas, but it seems things have kind of come full circle, and you're back in the nuclear industry, really kind of trying to promote it worldwide. So maybe walk me through a little bit of what you've been working on recently.
Yeah, so I started to see my return to the nuclear industry in 2020 during COVID. I was teaching some university classes, and so I was always trying to make sure that I was at least as well informed as my students. So I was reading and trying to become as well informed as I could on not just oil and gas, but on all types of energy.
Mhm.
And I was reading the uh, energy policies of all of the 20 plus candidates for president, Democratic candidates for president. So, can you imagine sitting down and reading the energy policy statements for all of those people? And of course, a lot of them didn't really have energy policies, and some of them were quite incoherent. And of course, you can forgive Pete Buttigieg for not having a coherent energy policy. He was the mayor of South Bend, Indiana. So,
Mhm.
but I got around to Michael Bloomberg, and of course, he's a very prominent person, very smart, successful. And on his website, he said, "If you elect me president, by the end of our second term, 80% of our electricity in this country will be produced from renewable energy." And being a professor, teacher of energy, being in the energy business for 40 years, I knew that was just total bunk. I mean, it just made my head explode to think that. So I I started thinking about all the reasons why this was a ridiculous statement, and I didn't really know where it was going to go. But as I started to research and delve into all the reasons why Michael Bloomberg's statement was ridiculous, I realized that nuclear energy was the future, and that we weren't going to make serious decarbonization strides without nuclear energy. We weren't going to lift millions of billions of people out of poverty without much more nuclear energy. I just felt like that was kind of the solution that we had been overlooking for the last 20, 25 years. So this idea started to emerge in my mind. Now, I'm still a professional. I still do my own work. I still have my own job. So I'm not in the nuclear industry, so to speak. So I didn't really take any immediate action. But then fast forward about 1 year, you remember in the spring of 2021, I think it was the end of April or beginning of May, Governor Cuomo closed down Indian Point nuclear power plant in New York. And it was outrageous because you sit here and think, I'm not at that time was not advocating for new nuclear, but it seemed to me that when you're trying to decarbonize your energy systems and you've got a very safe, very clean, well run, well maintained, as Emmett Penny likes to say, industrial cathedral of clean energy, why you would shut that down for any reason? It's the low hanging fruit. And so I just got sort of riled up at the thought of us closing Indian Point down.
Mhm.
And so at that point, I started to say, how can I be more involved? And there were a lot of other plants that were nuclear power plants that were in jeopardy at that time. So we had Byron and Dresden in Illinois that were on the brink of being shut down. We had Diablo Canyon in California. And all of a sudden I'm thinking, okay, what can I do? And so I got involved with some organizations. I'm sure you know Mark Nelson.
Hmm.
I reached out to Mark Nelson, and he and I met and became friends. And he got me involved in sort of nuclear advocacy as my night job. So I still work in oil and gas, but my kids are all grown. It's too cold to play golf. So, what's my hobby? My hobby is advocating for nuclear energy. So that's how I got back into the game.
And that's great. And it's interesting that you kind of arrived at that through looking at, policy statements, which for large nuclear has always been driven by, policy and government kind of demand pushes. But I'm curious, what have you learned, through your advocacy group? What has been the feedback that you've gotten from the various parties, from, government officials to kind of local people on the ground, and just from the broader nuclear industry and from the oil and gas industry?
Well, it's been a learning curve for me, because I'm getting back into nuclear energy and I really don't know that much about it, in 2021. And so I start trying to surround myself, study, listen to every episode of Titans of Nuclear Energy, which I have, some of them several times. And I started trying to educate myself. I became members of some of the working groups that were set up to try and save Diablo Canyon and some of the other nuclear power plants, and the ones in Germany as well. And to be honest, I kind of sat on the sidelines, listened to a lot of the meetings, learned about the politics, learned about the advocacy, learned about the industry. So that's how I spent my first, couple of years, really on the sidelines. And I didn't do a whole lot that I could say was meaningful in terms of things that were impactful to promoting nuclear energy, because I really wasn't in a position to do so. I donated a little money. I donated a little time. I did go to, I'm sure you're familiar with the Stand Up for Nuclear organization out of California, Paris Ortiz Wines. They set up a rally in Germany in November of 2021 to go rally in support of keeping the remaining nuclear power plants open. I got on a plane and went over and participated in that rally. We all knew at the time that we were going to have no impact on that. But what we were hoping to do is maybe turn the tide of opinion and hopefully save the last three. The three that were closing down in 2021 were probably already cooked. But so I did that, and then I actually went back to Germany again this spring, or last spring, and now it's 2024. Went back in April when they were about to shut down the remaining three German power plants, and went with Stand Up and Mark Nelson and rallied in support of trying to keep those open. And there is a lot of support for nuclear energy in Germany. Unfortunately, it's just the Green Party has just have been so entrenched in this policy position for so long, they could not change their mind. But I think I've seen polls recently as much as 70% of German public is in favor of nuclear energy. So there's still a lot of pro-nuclear people there. So I did that. And so again, those weren't particularly meaningful. I went to the rallies, I learned, I met lots of people. But in terms of moving the needle on nuclear, what could I do? And then about a little over a year ago, I was on a conference call with the Save Diablo Canyon group, and we meet every week on Zoom and talk about what we're doing, what's coming up, what we need to do, looking for volunteers, how do we raise money, how do we contact congressmen, all those sorts of things. And one of the people in that group made a comment about oil and gas. And so, of course, I am, in most of these groups, I am the only oil and gas person there. And, Mark Nelson is often referred to me as his token oil and gas guy. He says, we need a broad consensus. We need to bring everybody to the table. And Doug is now our token oil and gas person. And in some groups, I'm not necessarily always immediately welcome, because, and it's understandable, so there's no hard feelings, but as you probably know, a large portion of the people who are pro-nuclear advocates now have come to nuclear advocacy in recent years because of climate concerns. They weren't looking at nuclear as a viable option, but now as they see the difficulties with transitioning to an all renewable, all electric system, the challenges of doing that, the importance of having secure energy, reliable energy for national security purposes, people have started to come around to the idea that nuclear energy needs to be at least part of the solution. A lot of those people are very climate concerned people. And if you're very climate concerned people, some of those people, don't like oil and gas, and they don't like people like me who work in oil and gas. So I would go to some of this, I would be involved in some of these groups, and there would be a little bit of pushback or hostility. But Mark Nelson was always good to push back and say, look, guys, he's here to help us. So, don't judge him just because he happens to get a paycheck from producing natural gas. So, but anyway, I was in this meeting with this Diablo Canyon group, and someone said, well, we know all you guys in oil and gas hate nuclear. And I'm like, that's just a ridiculous statement. I mean, and so you've been in oil and gas. I don't know what your experience was, but I couldn't think of anybody that I know in our industry who did not like nuclear energy. We're not all proponents. We're not all out actively advocating for nuclear, but I thought that was a silly statement. And so I took myself off of mute and pushed back and said, I think that's not true. I think that most people in oil and gas are pragmatic. They know energy. They know how the value of an energy dense fuel and a reliable fuel like nuclear energy. And I said, I frankly think that's just a ridiculous statement. And then it was followed up with a statement that oil and gas companies overtly undermine nuclear energy. And I said, again, I can't think of anybody that I know or any company that I know that does that. It's possible somebody has. As I've done more research, I have not found any companies actively undermining nuclear energy, any oil and gas companies. And frankly, you'd have to go back to the 50s or the 60s to find anybody with any ties to oil and gas doing any sort of meaningful advocacy against nuclear energy. So I thought the statement that oil and gas people hate nuclear was ridiculous. And the idea that oil and gas companies are out to undermine nuclear energy, I thought those were both ridiculous. So I then started asking around thinking, well, maybe my paradigm is wrong. Maybe I just don't know. And so I started asking people and friends and colleagues and coworkers. And in a year, I never found anyone. I still haven't found anyone. And I'm sure there are. How many millions of people work in the oil and gas industry? Certainly someone somewhere is anti-nuclear, but it is a very, very small minority. I'm not aware of any oil and gas companies that are undermining nuclear. In fact, we'll talk about this in a short bit. I think there's a lot of oil and gas companies that are very interested in nuclear energy. Mm-hmm. So I took that as an opportunity to say, I sort of wanted to prove this premise incorrect. And so I decided that maybe we should come out with a statement in support of nuclear energy. And what we did is we drafted what we call a declaration of oil and gas executives in support of nuclear energy. And what we did was we kind of described how important energy is to the world, how important energy is to prosperity, how important energy is to lifting people out of poverty. And then we listed all the ways that we as a society and as our government should help foster more nuclear energy, both in the US and overseas. And I had this idea. If you've been in the oil and gas business, you probably know Liberty Energy. Mm-hmm. They originally were branded as a frack company, but they're more than a frack company now. So they've rebranded as Liberty Energy, but they are one of the largest frack companies in the world. And their CEO is a huge proponent of energy, more energy. He's not an apologist for oil and gas. He knows what value oil and gas has brought to the world, but he's a great ambassador for all types of energy. And so he's a friend of mine, and I sent him a note and I said, what do you think of this idea of this declaration? Now I'm a nobody, but Chris is Chris Wright being the CEO is a big dog. And I sent him this idea and he immediately responded and said, I love this idea. Let's do it. So we drafted this declaration and he was the first person to sign it. And we started going out and asking other oil and gas executives to sign it. And so far we have over 100, close to 110 executives who signed this declaration of unequivocal support for nuclear energy.
Well, it sounds like you've proven that person wrong. I would say that was the I guess the rumor that like oil and gas was undermining as an industry nuclear, but I'd never seen it. If anything, I'd always heard from engineers in the industry that nuclear made complete sense. It just wasn't being worked on, and that wasn't what they were focused on. But I think you're right that there are a lot of um, oil and gas majors that are looking at how can we use nuclear energy in our energy mix? How can we play in that space? Because they see it being as part of the energy mix going forward and want to be a player in all types of energy. You know, you're seeing them diversify into solar and wind, geothermal, and they see nuclear being a major leg of that as well.
Yes, and I've been surprised because even though I've been in the oil and gas business, I was unaware of how much interest there is in the oil and gas industry in nuclear until I started on this little journey and started getting executives to sign this declaration. And now we find now there are a lot of oil and gas companies that are interested in nuclear energy. There's several major oil companies who are invested in nuclear energy. I don't think it's a big secret that Chevron has invested in a couple of nuclear energy companies.
Mhm.
And in fact, Liberty Energy, which we just mentioned before, they're an investor in Oklo.
Okay.
So there is a lot of interest. And I think that's because a lot of these companies are more energy agnostic than you would think. They just want to provide safe, reliable, affordable energy. And I can see where some of these companies in the future will be energy companies, will be oil and gas and nuclear companies.
Mhm.
We've seen a big press the last few years with companies like BP and Shell to become more quote unquote sustainable and invest more in renewables and wind and solar. And it hasn't worked out that well for them because partly because that's not their wheelhouse, but also they haven't financially worked. It hasn't worked out for them financially. And I can see, 10 years from now, it's probably more likely that you'll see these big companies invested in sustainable energy being oil and gas companies first and being nuclear, be emerging as nuclear companies as well.
Mhm. Well, I'm curious, what was the feedback that you got when you were initially reaching out? Was it everyone had similar reactions to Chris Wright at Liberty Energy, or were there some people that needed some convincing? What was the general reaction among the executives, the 110 that you signed up?
Almost everybody signed on the spot. I mean, no questions asked. I was amazed at how many people. When I mentioned it, they said the first thing they said is, "Where do I sign? How do I sign this thing?" I had very little pushback from anybody. I obviously had a few CEOs, and I'm not going to call them out, but of some large companies, major oil companies, who said, "Look, we support nuclear energy, but my board of directors and my PR staff is not going to let me come out and sign this declaration."
Mhm.
So now it's been a year and 3 months that I've been working on this. I still have not found a single person. There's not been one person who has said, "I will not sign it because I don't support nuclear energy." There's been a few that said, "I can't sign it for political reasons or my company won't allow me." I've had a lot of people that have reached out and wanted to sign it that just heard about it through the grapevine. I did not know the president of Chesapeake Energy, the CEO of Chesapeake Energy, and I got an email from somebody that said, "Hey, he heard about your endeavor. He'd like to sign the declaration." I didn't have his email address, but when somebody provided it to me, I sent it to him. He immediately signed it. Toby Rice, I'm sure you know Toby from EQT. I didn't have any way to get a hold of. These are important people. I don't necessarily have a Rolodex with all their email addresses on it. And somebody introduced me to Toby by email and said, "Toby, meet Doug. Doug, meet Toby." And within 30 minutes, Toby had signed that declaration and sent it back. So it's been amazing. I've had several people other people who have reached out to me. The founder or the president CEO of Inveris reached out to me and heard about it, said, "Hey, I want to sign this." So it's been all positive. I have not had any pushback at all. And I don't see anyone in my industry still who, I mean, I think everyone's fascinated and thinks this is, we all recognize that the world is going to need lots and lots more energy, not less.
Mhm.
And even in the US, I mean, we've had a fairly flat trajectory of electricity use over the last 30 or 40 years. We have not really grown in per capita electricity use. But the advent of AI and data processing centers, I mean, I foresee a fairly substantial growth in electricity in the next 10 years, which we have not seen for 30 or 40 years. That's just the US alone. But you think about all the billions of people who do not have access to reliable electricity or reliable energy, the actually probably billions who have no access to electricity. Um, as Robert Bryce likes to say, the iron law of electricity, people will find a way to get the electricity they need. And they're going to get the electricity. And so if we can produce it with nuclear energy, that would be good.
Mhm. Yeah, clean, carbon-free, base load product is great for a market that's trying to get clean electricity. So I'm curious, maybe your view. What do you think that the nuclear industry can do with the oil and gas industry? How can these two industries come together to really grow this, carbon-free baseload product?
Well, I I think there's a lot going on behind the scenes that most people don't know, and I was even unaware being in the industry. But I heard someone mention the other day, tell me what's going on in the nuclear industry, and the reality is what he said was, and I can't remember who it was. I wish I could. Said it's kind of like a duck sitting on a river. The duck is sitting still, but you don't realize how fast those feet are paddling underneath to keep it in place. And I think there's a lot of things going on in the nuclear industry that people don't know about. I mean, the average person doesn't realize how many advanced technologies are in development. There are so many positive things going on in the nuclear industry right now. The average person has not caught up yet with that. Now, in the oil and gas business, I think there's a great synergy there. One of the big thing. So, since you've been involved in the industry, you know, um, one of the things that we do is we drill oil and gas wells, and then we turn around and frack those wells to break open the rock and release the oil and gas from the rock. Those are very energy intensive endeavors.
Mhm.
And a few years ago, there's a few companies that were starting to explore the possibility of using electric drilling rigs and electric frac fleets. And these were sort of niche markets. And the reason they were trying to do this is they're drilling in areas like the neighborhoods in northern Colorado, where you have people who moved into the oil fields, and now you're trying to make the drilling process quieter for homes and families that are nearby. And the same thing for the frac fleets. But now I think there's a really, I'm amazed at the push. Pioneer Energy, Liberty Energy, the push from these big companies to electrify these drilling fleets and these frac fleets, not just for the noise, but now they're trying to do it in an effort to really clean up
Mhm.
the exploration process. So instead of using diesel generators, so you use electricity, but you're still having to generate that electricity. And if you can't get it, if you can get off the grid, great. But a lot of times you can't get it off the grid, so you're using diesel, which is actually, not really any cleaner than using diesel engines for the frac. I mean, you use diesel to create the electricity, or just use diesel direct. But I think there's a big push now to clean up the emissions part of the exploration process. So I see a huge push, particularly in the Permian Basin, which, of course, this is Texas. This is a good old boy Texas. They are pushing hard to clean up the emissions from drilling and completions. Well, one obvious way to do that is to get that electricity for your electric drilling rigs and your electric frac fleets, is to get that electricity from nuclear energy.
Mhm.
So I think that I'm suspecting that's probably why Liberty Energy is invested in Oklo. I have a friend who works for a refinery in Texas who said, here's the problem. We're out in West Texas, and the Permian Basin has grown so much, so fast, and the electrical utilities cannot keep up with the demand for electricity, much less converting all your drilling and frac fleets to electricity. He said if we were to ask for a new hookup from the utility, we're looking at 3 to 5 years minimum before we can get a new hookup. There's not enough transformers, not enough copper wire. There's not enough qualified linemen to do the work. And so there's a real need for more electricity in the oil field. And yet there is very difficult right now with supply chain issues and so forth to get electricity where it's needed, when it's needed, at an affordable cost. And I think that nuclear could play a role in that. It was interesting. I heard the other day that one idea, and this I had never even heard this, but I thought it was a wild idea, is that you have all these frac fleets out in West Texas, just for example, that are working 24/7, fracking all these oil wells. Of course, they're generating a lot of electricity to run those frac fleets. And one idea was that these energy companies could then serve as backup power at times when the grid needs it. So, for instance, you have a one-off storm that only happens once every 10 years, Winter Storm Uri, a few years ago in Texas, where we had quite a few people die. The grid was in really bad shape. We had a lot of rolling blackouts, and they just couldn't sustain the electricity to all the homes. And the idea that I heard was that these frac fleets could be then turned off and stop their fracking for a day or 2 or 3, and they could turn that energy back into the grid on an emergency basis. So that was a fascinating and really innovative thing, because it really, you're not going to do it very often, but you could provide a really valuable asset to the grid to have that as a backup. So there's all sorts of innovative things that are going on, and a synergy between oil and gas and nuclear energy.
Yeah, I think it's good to marry up kind of what's been the legacy major leg of the energy mix to, what I think can be the major leg of, the new energy mix going forward in the future. It plays a small role today, but I think it'll continue to grow into the future. And, speaking of the future, I guess in your advocacy work and what you're working on next, you're looking forward, what do you really see as the momentum for nuclear, and what are some exciting things that you're looking forward to in the next several years?
Well, I'm trying to figure out what an oil and gas guy can do to help the cause here. I think that we have done so much in the last 5 years. I say we, mean us as a society. I'm talking about titans of nuclear, Last Energy. There's so much great that has happened in the last 5 years, because people are talking about nuclear now, whereas 5 years ago nobody was talking about nuclear energy. We still got a lot of work to do, but it's become somewhat of a bipartisan issue in a lot of areas. You've seen the lifting of nuclear moratoriums in some states that are heavily Democrat states. And so typically in the past, Republicans have been pro-nuclear. A lot of Democrats have not been, but you see that changing. It does seem like this can be a bipartisan issue going forward. We'd like to make it a bipartisan issue in my home state of Colorado. Unfortunately, we have a pretty entrenched anti-nuclear group here, but we're working on it. The problem is that we've had so many good things happen. I mean, you look at 3 years ago, if you went to a COP meeting, in wherever, the nuclear people weren't even allowed to attend. They were, people are throwing eggs at them outside the event. And then of course this year we have COP 28, and we have 22 initially, and then 3 additional have signed on. I think they're up to 25 countries have pledged to triple the amount of nuclear energy by 2050. Well, this is an official part of COP 28. Whereas 3 years ago, you're getting eggs thrown at you. So we have made so many great strides, and it is so heartening to see that we're moving the right direction. But here's the problem. The problem is that that's the easy part. We're changing minds and hearts. And what we have to do is learn how to build affordable nuclear energy, because if we can't build it, if we can't develop the supply chains, if we can't develop the personnel, I mean, we have a dearth of people who know how to build nuclear power plants. We haven't built hardly any in the last 30 years, so we don't have the people. And so the big challenge right now is to take all this momentum and all this positive vibes and all this positive talk and turn it into some tangible. We need to build. We need to start building. And I have friends who are in the micro reactor business. I have friends who are in the small modular reactor business. I have friends who, are traditional nuclear folks who want to build traditional
Large gigawatt scale,
large
right?
gigawatt scale. And we, my view is we need it all. I mean, we have to build some PWRs immediately. We have the technology, we have the know-how, we have the supply chain. We have to do that now. And at the same time, we've got to develop these new technologies because a 1 gigawatt PWR doesn't work everywhere in every situation. So we do still need some help at the NRC. The NRC still, I don't want to bash the NRC, which is a very popular thing to do. And the reality is that the NRC is not as bad as the worst illustration of what they are, but they are still have a lot of things that need to be improved there. So the first step is public engagement. We put pressure on our congressmen and senators, and then they put pressure on the NRC to make the regulation more reasonable. But we've got to move. We've also got to do better on finding ways to finance these projects. I am not typically a big government person, but these projects are government size. I mean, these projects are so huge. Some of these nuclear projects are as big as the economies of some small countries. And so these are such large scale that I think we have to be honest and admit that there's going to have to be some federal push to help get the flywheel started. The so-called IRA is a good start because we now have production tax credits and or investment tax credits, which can be used to build nuclear power plants. So I think that's a good start, but I think we're going to need more from the federal government in terms of incentivizing and backstopping at least the first half dozen plants that we get. And once we get the flywheel rolling and we get the knowledge going, I mean, we've done this with wind and solar now for the last 20 or 30 years. And we need to do the same thing for nuclear because the private sector and we just don't have that many investor-owned utilities who are willing to step up and take on that cost and risk. We are going to need more help from the federal government to get the flywheel rolling.
Right. I completely agree with you. I think there's a lot of, tangential kind of lessons you can learn from various different forms of energy. When solar and wind first started, it wasn't the cheapest source, and you've seen rapid, cost curve decline, and nuclear can experience that, but you got to build these things. You got to build a lot of them to be able to, see some of those cost curves. I think there's a lot of people that are working on that solution as well. And it's interesting to hear, your point of view on multiple technologies. A lot of the feedback we hear sometimes in the market is that we just got to figure out which technology works and just pick that one and just do it a bunch. And, I could go back to my time in oil and gas and just think we would have just said, hey, we're only doing this one type of way of drilling and this is it. And we've just got to commit to it. There would have been so much value that we would have lost, by not iterating, not figuring out what works best.
Absolutely. Not all 53 small modular reactor types that are being worked on right now, not all of those are going to succeed, but they've got to go through the process and the market will ferret out the ones that work and don't work. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't keep going. And we're going to need pressurized water reactors. We're going to need gigawatts scale nuclear between now and 2050, or we're not going to triple that amount of. But at the same time, we need to be focusing on these new technologies, the SMRs and the micro reactors. We've got to do it all. I mean, sometimes people hate to hear that, but we do need to do it all. We need to do the big, the small, the medium, and I'm going to acknowledge, it's not going to all be nuclear. There's going to be part of our energy solution in the next 25 years is going to be advanced geothermal. It's still going to be solar and wind. A lot of people don't want to hear this, but believe it or not, we're going to still have a lot of oil and gas. I mean, I personally doubt that we will see peak oil and gas during my lifetime. And I know that I'm anticipating 2023 was the highest oil and gas usage in history. I'm not promoting oil and gas. I'm just stating the fact that the oil and gas we used more oil and gas last year than in any year previous. The projections are for 104 million barrels to be used next year, and 105 million plus barrels to be used in 2025. And so we need a little energy sobriety about what's really going to happen. And I know everybody wants to say keep it in the ground. We're not going to have oil and gas in 5 years from now or 10 years from now. It's just hogwash. I mean, I'm not saying we should. I'm just saying what's going to happen. And so we're going to have an all of the above type energy system. We're still going to be using lots of oil and gas. And outside of the U.S. and Western Europe, we're probably going to still be using a lot of coal for the next 20 years. And this was 2023, I believe, was also a record-setting year for coal usage. You think that you hear in the U.S. and you think, coal's on the way out. Well, it is here, right? But it's not. It's not in Indonesia or China or India or many other places, South Africa.
They have large energy demand that's growing, right? And that's how they can meet it, is using something that's worked and been working for hundreds of years now.
Yes, that iron law of electricity. They're going to find a way to get their electricity, and even if it's with coal. So I think I see that we're going to, I have a lot of friends who think we ought to do just all nuclear, and I have friends who think we should just do all solar or all wind. And of course, a lot of people in the oil and gas business say, we don't need that. We can do it with oil and gas. We are going to need it all, especially if you think about the growth in energy we expect over the next 30 years in the developing world. We may triple the amount of worldwide energy usage in the next 30 years. If we do that, then even if you use the same amount of oil and gas, you're still going to need huge amounts of additional energy from nuclear and other things.
Right. Yeah, I'm a big proponent of energy abundance versus, energy refinement or decreasing or efficiency. I think we just always got to figure out how we can make more energy, and that's just going to lift everyone up to have higher access to a better quality of life.
And I think that, unfortunately, we have not done a good job of educating the public on this. You and I understand that. We've been in the energy industry, but the average Joe or Joanne do not understand that energy use is directly correlatable to prosperity. I mean, there is no such thing as a low energy, high wealth nation. It doesn't happen. It doesn't exist. Now we got to find the best ways to use the energy. We need to use it efficiently. We need to use it cleanly as we can. But the idea that we're just going to make everything better by using less energy is just folly, total folly.
Completely agree. And I think, a lot of it comes down to, I think, as you said, we've both worked in the industry. We've seen firsthand, the work that it takes to generate the energy, that everyone just flips on the light switch and assumes that it's as simple as that. But there's a lot that goes into building energy systems, getting the materials needed, and a lot of people on the line to make that happen.
It's interesting how many people I know in the nuclear industry that when I first met them 3 or 4 years ago, and they didn't know anything except about nuclear energy. And as they've now tried to become advocates for energy, and they've learned about coal and they learned about oil and gas, they're much more, I say, tolerant of oil and gas than they were several years ago. And that's just because they just didn't know, they didn't understand. And now once they have become more engaged in trying to become more learned themselves about energy, a lot of those people who 3 years ago would have absolutely detested oil and gas, they're like, well, maybe it's not quite as bad as we think it is, and they recognize the value and what it's done for society and for human flourishing. And so I do think that the more you know, the more the more tolerant you would be of oil and gas. But I think the more you know, the more you realize we need lots more energy, not less. We can't take a Malthusian kind of attitude towards energy transition.
Well, great. Yeah, I'm glad that I think it's better to be well-rounded and know all the energy systems that are available, all the technologies, and glad that the nuclear industry is getting up because I think there's a lot of things you can learn from solar, wind, from oil and gas, from really any energy source that's been out there to be able to scale that the nuclear industry can take lessons learned from, and hopefully that makes us the best industry going forward.
Yeah, I'm sure you probably know Emmett Penny.
No, I'm not familiar with them, if any.
Well, he does a podcast called Nuclear Barbarians,
Oh,
and
I'm okay. Yeah, familiar with the Nuclear Barbarians podcast.
and he doesn't mind me saying this, but one reason I love him so much is he says, when I was in college, I was a really hardcore avowed Marxist. I was all in the and Karl Marx, and as he got out of college and he had to work 2 or 3 jobs at minimum wage, he eventually became less Marxist and and more pro-capitalist. But also the same thing with energy. I think as he's come along, maybe 5 years ago, maybe he was still feeling. I'm not going to speak for Emmett, but my impression is maybe he didn't have a very favorable view of oil and gas or a very favorable view of coal for coal. And now he's unashamedly says, we need it all, and the average person doesn't realize how important these other energy sources are.
Mhm.
And even Chris Kiefer, he does decouple. And when I first started listening to Chris a few years ago, I could hardly. He was so. He was. He. I don't think he's a doctor, and I don't think he knew that much about energy. And sometimes I just couldn't listen to his early podcast because he was. I felt like I don't want to say anti oil and gas, but he was definitely uneducated on the oil and gas and the coal and energy in general. He knew about nuclear, and he's done a fantastic job in advocating for nuclear energy across the world and in Canada. But I've seen a great transformation in him as well. It's not that he's a pro oil and gas person, but I think in the few years since he has started learning about the entire energy systems and learning the interrelationships between energy, I think he's become a lot more soft.
Mhm.
He's softened some of the hard edges about oil and gas and coal. So I think that most people who, once they know the facts, understand how important those industries still are.
Yeah, I like we said, I think they'll be a big part of the energy mix, but I think we're only going to get cleaner, we're only going to get more efficient, and hopefully cheaper electricity as well as all these technologies become, more refined. The cost curves continue to go down. I think it'll just be an energy abundant world, and that's what we're all working for.
Yep, I agree.
Well, great, Doug. We're gonna wrap up, but is there anything that you're working on next, or any way that people can get in touch with you?
Yeah, I think probably the best way to get in touch is on our website. We have a website, Oil and Gas Executives for Nuclear website. Now you can put that in your show notes if you want. And I'm very active on LinkedIn, so that's probably the best way to get a hold of me is on LinkedIn. I'm just going to continue. I'm not a nuclear engineer, so I'm not, doing experiments on, a new molten salt reactor. I'm not doing that kind of thing. What I'm trying to do is um, help raise the visibility of this issue. I'm trying to see what I can do from a regulatory environment. In my state of Colorado, we're working on some initiatives to, get Colorado more interested in nuclear energy as well. And so, just going to continue working at a grassroots level, doing what I can to advance the idea that the world needs a lot more nuclear energy.
Well, it's great work that you're doing, and looking forward to kind of watching you on LinkedIn and seeing what you're working on next. And glad to see the industry evolving and more people getting involved in the nuclear space.
Well, thanks for having me on. I love you guys. I love the podcast. It's a must listen to every week. So thanks for having me on. Let's get the word out.
Well, dude, thanks. Really appreciate that. Thanks, Doug.
And initiate at least a new approach to the many difficult problems that must be solved in both private and public conversation if the world is to shake off the inertia imposed by fear and is to make positive progress toward peace.